get upset on the internet.
Whoa, what the hell's going on here? Hey everybody, welcome to Retro Station 1989. I'm Commander Dan, and I don't know what the heck's going on. This is the Retro Station, and I'm the commander and lone inhabitant of the Retro Station, along with, well, Splat, who is a holographic image, and Cambot, who's running the cameras, and the AI for the station. But what the hell's all this? Anyway, what we do here is License to Play, where we review licensed video games, and it appears as though things have gotten a little weird. Hello? Hello? I mean, of course, everyone aboard with a physical presence is doomsday prepping for this week's title. I mean, after last week's highly controversial and maybe a little offensive evaluation, apparently Splat and Cambot Jr. think we won't survive our encounter with this week's game. But come on, guys, it's really gonna be fine.
No way, Commander Dan. I watched this thing on the station's video system last night, and being the only fleshy, tan, nearly alien human being on the ship, I just realized I'm trapped with a person from Earth!
Seriously? You're scared of me now? What the hell?
Look, it's nothing personal, but humans killed that poor ham-headed glow beast. And well?
I'm human. That's Spaces, buddy.
Hey, I think poisoning E.T. and stealing his organs is a hate crime.
Wait a minute. That's not how E.T.'s movie ends.
Too scary. I got the gist, though. You hang around with humans, you turn into a chalky white dog turd on the sidewalk.
Oh, ha ha. Well, Elliot didn't seem to be doing so great either. They both look like a pair of dried-up dog turds. And furthermore, that's not how the movie ends?
It isn't?
No, you dinkbat. The movie ends like all Spielberg movies end. You know, with a happy ending so sweet it'll rot your teeth out.
I don't have any teeth.
And neither does the ending of E.T. Look, bud, I promise you, you're in no danger from me. We're best friends. And the Retro Station is going to be just fine. Can we at least get out of Code Red and lose the horns for crying out loud? Thank you. Sheesh. Cambot Jr., fire up the historical footage and maybe I can calm all of you down just a little bit. Let's set the flux capacitor to way back in the 1980s, when I was just getting into the third grade. My family was constantly on the move. My dad was in the military, and the move we just made was all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the city of Pattonville in Germany near Stuttgart. We just arrived and our toys and housing stuff from storage had finally arrived sometime after Christmas. All our stuff had been packed into ice chests and coolers and had that smell of old store-bought ice and plastic and rubber. We'd been there long enough to realize that AFN television wasn't going to cut it for a house with 3 kids, so my dad got a VCR to entertain us. He got us 2 movies. From a friend of a friend from the streets of Stuttgart, I guess, 2 bootlegs. Because we missed E.T. In the theaters and Empire Strikes Back with the move to Germany. And there, in our apartment, we watched a bootleg of E.T., and I loved it. It had D&D, a wise-ass 80s kid, and helping a helpless alien who looked like someone accidentally resurrected a honey-baked ham in the wrong order, but somehow looked enough like Estelle Getty to be considered cute. Sort of like this. The movie had a lot to love, but then Elliot shared his Star Wars toys with E.T., which immediately gave him points in my book, and I fell head over heels for the flick. We were in Germany for the middle of the 80s, and that VCR got us through a lot of, boring weekends, and it got a thorough workout. But just before heading back to the U.S., we got this bad boy. Now this is an Atari 2600 cartridge. The Atari, well, it was a workhorse home entertainment console for many, many years. The technology was never cutting edge. It was maybe close to what contemporary level of tech to keep pricing lower than it otherwise would be, but it wasn't really what you'd call space age. I mean, in the 80s, the Atari was the home console choice of most families, and mine was no exception.
Commander, how can you be sure? Of all the games in the Retro Station's holographic collection, this game has the worst reputation, beyond that of even McKids or Dick Tracy.
Oh no, you threw down the gauntlet, Margot, and I don't back down from challenges, because I'm not very smart. But your concern is noted. Thank you. Cambot Jr., let's throw down some context for our fine space pirates and the sponsors from Planet X, and talk a little bit about the little challenge this week. Well, first, in the 80s, the arcade craze was at its first golden age peak in 1982. reaching 10,000 arcades across the U.S., with games coming out and rotating like television shows or videos on streaming services. Every kind of game was out there, not to mention pinball. Video games were not, as one tech put it, a fad, but a new genre of entertainment. Add to this a new home console market, which basically comprised of very high-end but obscure type experiences like the Bally Home Arcade, or the Magnavox Odyssey 1, which wasn't quite a home arcade experience, but a multimedia entertainment device that used a television. Atari's genius was delivering arcade hits to the living rooms of folks who were fascinated and plunking down quarter after quarter into machines that were found everywhere. Laundromats, gas stations, arcades, pizza parlors, and everywhere people collected and had a minute or two to play video games and a quarter in their pocket, you'd find a video game. In those days, Atari meant video games. If you said Atari to someone, they would conjure up in their head scenes of video games like Space Invaders, Night Driver, Asteroids, Missile Command, Pac-Man, games they didn't even make, really, they just branded. I mean, they owned the arcade space, and almost by default, well, the home console space as well. Just like Disney means family entertainment today, the juggernaut Nolan Bushnell created in Atari was synonymous with two words: video games. Now, the advent of the summer blockbuster was a new concept in theaters, beginning with Star Wars and going forward with hits like Jaws, Raiders, and so many more. The kings of the summer blockbuster were, no question, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. In 1982, Spielberg continued his dominance of the American box office with another space tale, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. And Lucas and Spielberg joined forces and created Raiders of the Lost Ark. Those movies were a hit with kids and adults and told relatable stories, which was incredible, because E.T. legit looks like a haunted lunch meat trying to get a scholarship into the actor's studio. E.T.'s story is a classic one of a stranded weirdo who is taken in by a pack of suburban kids and through hijinks and misadventure learn to understand one another. The kids hide E.T. from their mom, take him trick-or-treating, where he nearly meets Yoda, which is very important. I'll show you something really neat here in another video sometime. But they finally help him build a makeshift communicator array with a speak and spell, an umbrella, and a Fisher-Price record player, and a table saw blade, and like a ton of string, and some tinfoil in a ditch in the woods. God damn, E.T. is a damn dirty Mary Sue. But E.T. was a hit. Toys, bedspreads, games, snacks, cereal. And because Steven Spielberg was dedicated to the future of entertainment, and Warner Brothers, the owners of Atari, wanted to be in the Steven Spielberg blockbuster business, they came to him with the idea of pairing up to create another video game. See, Atari had changed hands. Nolan Bushnell sold them to Warner Brothers, and they were hoping that this would woo Steven from Universal Studios over to the Warner Brothers studios for movies. They promised him something insane, because they clearly didn't understand how video games were designed, developed, or planned. They promised that Steven Spielberg's masterpiece E.T. would have a video game for the Atari 2600 by Christmas of 1982. E.T. came out in June. Put that in your head. Generally, games based on movies are designed alongside the movie and are in production at the same time. But E.T., as part of Warner Brothers' gaudy attempt to sway Spielberg, was a project that was destined to fail. But did it fail? That's right. This week we're talking about E.T. on the Atari 2600. A game so notorious that it made the AI aboard the retro station freak out, and my friend Splat think that I was going to dissect him in some kind of a laboratory. Well, Cambot, do me a favor and fire up that footage in the databanks called silverbullet.exe.flm.movie. I know more than Margot because I got a great interview with someone very special. Yes, yes, I know. Fire it up.
Hello there. My name is Howard Scott Warshaw. I did a number of games for Atari back in the day, most notably Yar's Revenge, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., and Saboteur. More recently, I revisited a lot of my time at Atari in this book, Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. Because as many of you know, I am reputed to be the person who destroyed the video game industry in the early 80s with my E.T. video game. Great to be here.
Well, thank you, Howard. First of all, you didn't kill anything. Because if you did, I wouldn't have my copies sent back to me of Raiders of the Lost Ark from my family. And I had to re-buy E.T. My original cartridge was damaged in a move. But and I'm telling you now, to your face, truthfully, I love this game.
Oh, thank you.
But the reason why is because, well, that goes into my questions. My first question is...
nobody needs a reason to love E.T. as far as I'm concerned.
But there is context, and that's what my show's all about. And so I've stepped out of the character of Commander Dan to tell everyone, seriously, I love E.T. It's because when the Atari was out, it had a lot of limitations that are just apparent if you try it today. You're like, wow, this is kind of primitive. Now imagine that when you see the two tanks in combat moving around, it's beyond Pong, and you're like, wow, that's great. When you see multicolored human figures walking around in E.T., that's magical. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention all of that is because I watched the documentary. Once Upon a Atari.
Which documentary is that?
I believe it's the one that you produced back in the 90s.
Oh, Once Upon Atari.
Yeah, Once Upon Atari. You interviewed Carlo Malinsky, Jerome Dummerat, Todd Fry. Basically, all the heavy hitters from the early days of Atari before the Warner Brothers shake-up and what they called Your Fault, which wasn't. I think that there's a lot of things that happened, and it wasn't Pac-Man either. If it was, then why are there millions of copies sold of Pac-Man? But anyway, I want your opinion on this and your answers for this. But my first question would be, describe to somebody who doesn't know what the limitations of the Atari were for someone creating any game that would create visuals on the screen.
It's hard to describe the limitations of the 2600 to people who aren't familiar with some basic tech. But it's the idea of trying to enter the Indy 500 with a tricycle would be one way to put it.
Okay.
We only had 4K of memory to use to do the entire game program. Nowadays, you use more than 4K to describe a single element of any game. We had 128 bytes of RAM, not K, but bytes of RAM to play with. RAM is the memory you can actually write and change things with. So if you want to use scores, positions, anything you need to remember and track that changes during the game, that has to go in RAM. So imagine having just 128 sticky notes, and on each one you can write only like 3 or 4 digits. And that's all you have for the whole game. That's pretty limited. And the idea was to try and do as much as you could with by tricking the hardware and using clever techniques as opposed to just elaborate programming. And that was something I really specialized in and really enjoyed. That was the fun. That was the thrill of VCS programming.
I think
breaking through and finding something cool to do.
I think of all the folks at Atari, it was you and Dave Staugus who shocked me as a player. Like I had to read about how these things worked when I was a kid because I was like, why is Krull so different from say the Atari port of Jungle Hunt? Jungle Hunt's not a bad port. It's actually one of the best 2600 ports out there. And it was later when the Atari Junior came out that one kind of got another, rebirth. But it's like they also added chips to the carts to kind of boost things. Meanwhile, Krull is a multi-stage story being told, much like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Without the manual, this game is... I can see when somebody goes, oh, this game, I can't figure it out. This game is ridiculous. Second player controller. I'm like, yes, because all the functions you'd have on a Nintendo controller are all done with the actual Atari and a second controller. To that, is it easier to translate an arcade game like Jungle Hunt or Pac-Man to that limitation? So, like, you've got this one box of Legos to create, Monticello. Is it easier for an arcade experience, like a straight-up Jungle Hunt, or to develop new experiences based on licensed properties? Which was harder?
That's a really good question. I mean, the idea of comparing coin-op conversions to original games, licenses would be original games that just have a property associated with them. I never wanted to do a coin-op conversion, even though my first game was assigned as a coin-op conversion. I found a way to get around that and do Yars' Revenge as an original.
And it's a masterpiece. It is.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
It's Defender, Yars' Revenge. If they did a redo of the actual Yars' Revenge as an arcade, like just put it out there as a standalone, like a Fix It Felix kind of reminiscent
Well,
one.
people did that actually. There is an arcade
There
version.
is. I will put a link down below. I will find it and I'll check it out. That sounds really awesome.
It was basically the VCS version just put in a cabinet, but I've seen it at shows. But anyway, I mean, it's an interesting point. The difference between a conversion and a licensed property or an original game, the problem with doing a conversion is very straightforward in that the game is all designed, it's all set there, people like the game. The problem is that coin-op technology moves so quickly past what the VCS capability is that you're always kind of really lagging behind and really kind of sucking wind when you're trying to replicate a coin-op game. And the later on, the better the coin-op games got, the further behind they were. Now, with an original game, if you're going to do a license for an original game, now what you have is you have the freedom to do anything you want to do on the system, but you have a bigger name to live up to, and you have to make up a game. Now you have to create a gameplay, because there's two kinds of people who program, right? There's two different vectors of game designers. There's people who are really good programmers, and there's people who are really good game designers. And everybody has a score in each of those categories. Everybody wants to be the best at both, but not everybody is great at both. And so, are you more of a game designer? Then you're going to be better off doing an original thing. If you're more of a programmer, you're going to be able to do a better approximation of a coin-op. But obviously, you always need to draw on both. I always preferred the original thing because I like the freedom of being able to create a game, and I was always confident in my ability to make up a gameplay and do something worth playing.
I think what your talent was definitely was seeing what was fun about something and making something that was true to the experience in your head that you saw. For example, Star Castle, it's an alright game, it's fun. Yars' Revenge is better because there's a story there about the weirdest thing ever. It's like somebody asked me, what's Yars' Revenge's story? I said, well, it's like if a side of a van painting came to life, and then you had a video game about what was going on. Or a Yes album cover. It's amazing. And the comic with it shows that there was thought put into it. Yeah, there's a lot of programmer cheekiness where it's Ray Kassar's name, but the story is like, okay, but here's how it sets up the co-tile, here's how it sets up the barrier, and here's how it sets up Yar.
Well, Yars' Revenge was the first time anybody had written a backstory for a video game, and I did that to support the game. Yars' Revenge, it was very important to me to make a contribution to video gaming. I wanted to do some breakthrough stuff, and there's a lot of things in Yars' Revenge that became standards in video gaming later on. But one of them was it was the first time a video game had a full-on backstory, and then it had the first ancillary product with the comic book to tell the story. And I think it did enhance the game and made it deeper.
I don't think people understand also about Atari games. Like when you see, and I know it's kind of rough, you see just this cartridge. But an Atari game experience was the box, was the manual, was oftentimes like Centipede. That has a story, and apparently people didn't know that it's not a spaceship; it's a guy protecting his garden from evil centipedes. And it's like, wow. And then there were comics with it, and I'm like, oh wow, there's so much depth into this. And I think that, like I said, yours was taking this high resolution image of what the game was, like Star Castle, and then boiling it down to, no, these are the elements of Star Castle that are fun. And I can translate that into these Post-it notes and make a piece of art. You know what I mean? When people ask me, are video games art? I point to Raiders of the Lost Ark and go, yes. Because, it's pictograms at the bottom. But once you're told that basket is actually a grenade, that you're told that flute is a flute, and then represented larger on top of the screen, just seeing, for example, the tote type figure that's in Raiders of the Lost Ark, how big he is, moving around, or the merchant. It's like, I get it now. Okay, I see. Not everything has to be tiny. Everything can be bigger. And I think that, like I said, and the talent that I really do appreciate, and I'm a huge fan of, is like in E.T., I think what I saw was what it was like to be E.T. Now you're on a planet. How do you get off the planet? Well, you have to find some way to communicate. You have to know where to be. and you have to avoid the people trying to trap you. And really, there's no damage. There's no like, oh, squish, you're dead. It's all, they're just hindering you getting back, and that'll end up costing you your life on Earth. And I'm like, and that is the movie. Like you've taken what was a very complex human story about a boy and his friend, but you made it into here's an action game. You told an anecdote a lot.
Well, thank you.
About Steven Spielberg. Well, couldn't you made it more like Pac-Man? And I said, no. And then you said, couldn't you made your movie more like The Day the Earth Stood Still?
Well, thank you for telling the story for me.
Yeah, no, I just you've said a lot, and I wanted to get one more. How long does it normally take to create the average game back in those days using that 74
You want to talk about
technology?
the schedule for ET? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, I want to talk about it at the end, but I want to talk about how long did Yar's Revenge take?
Okay, so the average game took about 6 to 8 months usually to do. Yar's Revenge took me 7 months to create, and it took another 5 months of testing. Yar's Revenge was the most tested game in the history of Atari, and because there were some very odd political shenanigans that were going on behind the scene. But ultimately, the game won and went out and did well. Raiders of the Lost Ark took 10 months to do, because Raiders of the Lost Ark, I was trying to make the biggest adventure game anybody had ever seen on the VCS. Just a huge impression, a large game. Then came E.T. E.T. I was only given 5 weeks to do. So at a time when games typically took 6 months to do, I was given 5 weeks to do E.T. In fact, I was asked, can you do E.T. in 5 weeks? I was asked by Ray Kazar, the head of the company, who called me up personally, say, can you do this in 5 weeks? I said, absolutely I can. No one had ever done a game in less than 5 months or so. And but I just believed I could do it.
I think you did. I think that
I definitely did.
yeah, my experience, my actual experience with my younger brother and I, we played E.T. on Christmas Day, all Christmas Day. We didn't go to church the next day because we want to play E.T. and we want to finish it. We want to beat it, Because that was the other thing. Your games, Yar's Revenge was more of an arcade experience, but the licensed games had endings. You could win.
Right, you could win the game.
And I now have a question. Now, if I'm correct, it was from your documentary. Jerome Domerat worked with you on that.
Jerome Demuret, yeah,
Demuret.
He was my very good friend for 40 years. He died a few years ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry to hear that. The interviews
a
with
bummer.
him, he seems like a really cool guy.
He was a very cool guy. Very interesting guy, very different perspective. He did the art for E.T.
Really? Wow. And I think it's like the music for E.T. Like, I know it's just a little ditty at the beginning, but to capture like I said, you capture a symphony in bleeps and boops. You know what I mean? You capture a film's
art
feeling.
is an interpretive experience, right? And the VCS is a very primitive tool. That just means you have to adapt concepts to a primitive environment and hardware. But the thing is, it's a poor craftsperson who blames their tools. So I'm never going to tell you the VCS was too primitive. The VCS was what it was. The only limit you had with it was your imagination. The VCS was so primitive that it didn't have a lot of structure built into it that forced you into corners. So you could definitely walk off cliffs and hang yourself at times, but there was also the opportunity to create some really elegant and elaborate shenanigans with the hardware itself and exploit things. Like, for instance, the Ion Zone in Yar's Revenge.
Right.
One of the problems we have with the VCS is memory was so critical, so short, and graphics cost a lot of memory space. Well, I thought, I'm not going to waste space on graphics. So what I do is I created the Ion Zone by using the code from the game as the graphics and as the color value.
Oh, yeah, right. Wow.
It's a glittering effect, but what you're actually seeing there is code values just shoved into a graphics register and into a color register. And so that way, those things cost me absolutely zero memory, and it's a great visual effect. That's an example of the kind of thinking you have to do to really do well on the VCS. Right.
And I as I recall, there was a group of programmers who left to form Activision. And Pitfall was one of those things where I've heard it claimed, oh, this is the first game with a person running across the field. I'm like, well, the first game I remember with a person was Elliot in E.T. But Mike, and he's colorful. Like there's things about Activision games that are great. The action is great, but like in Keystone Cops, it's like it's one blocky guy. Maybe its feet go like this. In ET, you've got Elliot walking around, his arms move.
These are trade-offs. These are trade-offs that you have to make. Like you look at the differences between Raiders of the Lost Ark and ET. With Raiders of the Lost Ark, I wanted to make a huge game, so I reduced the resolution because I wanted to maximize what I could do with the memory I had and create the game impression. Then with ET, I crafted a very different type of approach. With ET, I used maximum resolution everywhere I could and increased the opportunity to use color to give Jerome the opportunity to make the best looking graphics that he could with certain of the objects, some of the player objects, and try to make something that really looked eye-poppingly good, at least by 2600 standards. But these are different design goals, right? And that's what you do. When you choose your design direction, you make trade-offs and you make decisions that either support or don't support where you're going. But I had a different vision for each game. And with ET, the vision was make it beautiful and get it done.
And I don't think anyone can deny that opening screen isn't one of the best visuals on the Atari 2600. The music is one of the most faithful representations of an opening ditty for an arcade game. I mean, Pac-Man sounds like 4 telephone tones. Meanwhile, E.T. looks and sounds like the experience.
Thank you. It was a big game. I wanted it to have a big opening impression.
You nailed it for my taste and my honest taste. You nailed it, and in a short amount of time.
Thank you.
Heroic. In fact, I have a question about heroic because I'm an artist, and I've long admired people who take things and make things out of hard situations. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is 2 guys in a loft, their last chance. It's poster board, them fooling around and drawing with just their inks and just their pens. And just Letratone, and that's it. And they create their last comic, and it hits. In your case...
You know what they say. When Warner gives you lemons, make lemonade.
I have a question about, in the documentary, they show this picture of you, the Enforcer. What's the story?
That's the one with the Mr. T hat on,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Because I was also doing a game called Saboteur. That was my 4th game at Atari. And that was my longest development. I actually have the shortest development, the longest development in history, because E.T. was done in 5 weeks and then went out to manufacturing. I worked on a game called Saboteur. That took a while in development, but wasn't released for 20 years. So I have the shortest development and the longest development time of any game. But Saboteur was an original creation that I did after Raiders and E.T. I wanted to get back to basic Twitch action like Yars' Revenge, which is my favorite type of game to make. But it took a while to come up with a good concept, a multi-screen action play game, a little Twitch stuff. I really enjoyed it. And as we were starting to close in on it, Atari picked up the A-Team property, and they decided we're going to work on the A-Team. So I had to recraft the game to add the A-Team theme. And it was while doing that, I went out and got the Mr. T hat that I put on.
It's pretty great. I'll show that. I'll splicey
by all means.
A picture of it because it's pretty great.
I'm known for getting into character for various games. I had a hat and a whip. For, Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's some good stories about that.
That's in the book, correct?
Oh, yeah. And Once Upon Atari, you can hear all the stories about how I used to sneak up behind marketing people and execs who would come visit the building and crack that whip.
Yes.
Jump right out of their suits.
It's pretty great.
Interesting.
I actually have my copy winging its way here. I saw it on Amazon when I was looking for the documentary to take a peek at. IGN did
excellent.
a review
and if
of it,
anybody wants an autographed copy, you can get that at onceuponatari.com. I just wanted to mention that for a moment.
Please do. By all means.
But with Saboteur, they wanted to make it the A-Team. So we started to develop Mr. T graphics and A-Team type graphics. And while we did that, I picked up the Mr. T hat. And I was wearing it one day in the graphics lab. And Jerome, who's the one who took a lot of the pictures of the spontaneous shots of me here and there, because he always had his Polaroid handy. So, and that's what had that shot. The Enforcer, was Mr. HSW. to work on the A-Team. And then they decided they didn't want to do the A-Team, so we switched it back to Saboteur. Then they said, nah, I think we will do the A-Team. We switched it back to A-Team. And then Atari crashed. That was got to be about, mid-1984.
Right.
Then Atari sold out, the crash happened, and it never got released until one of the throwback systems.
Right.
Many years ago.
Right, and I've seen footage of the prototype. I guess my question would be, one of the esoteric choices was to have just a head on the screens.
Yeah.
What prompted that? I mean, it is the most iconic image from the A-Team. I mean,
absolutely, and that was the point. It was supposed to be identifiable as the A-Team, and the truth is, you don't really need a character. I mean, we ultimately had a character in Saboteur, but for A-Team, I just thought, my idea is, especially on the VCS, we were not trying to do representational art. What we were trying to do was create video game play that made sense and to some degree had graphics that were identifiable. It was an opportunity. Mr. T is an iconic image that we were able to replicate.
Oh, no doubt.
So if you're going to make a little Mr. T head and a generic body, it didn't make sense. I thought it made more sense to have greater detail on the image, use it as a head, and so you shoot out of the head. So what? It's a video game. It's like, if you're going to look for realism, that's what one of the things with E.T. was people were really upset. And this was an interesting lesson. This was a very interesting lesson from E.T. One of the problems we had with E.T. was that it looked so good that people expected it to be real. They expected it to operate real physics the way it should be. Like you were saying before, here's an actual person. Here's actual characters that are running around and you get it. But the thing was, as a video game, you have collision detection. When any part of you touches a well, you fall in. That was by design because I want people to have to navigate between them. If you can only fall in with your feet, it makes it too trivial to run around and do it, which maybe wouldn't have been a bad design choice anyway, because people seem to prefer that way. But at the time, I was trying to find some gameplay, and having to navigate through narrow stretches was a good challenge. And so I just made it so collision detect anywhere. But people believed those characters. They bought into the characters to the point where when you touched it with your head and fell into the well, people said, that's no good. You should only fall into a well with your feet, because they weren't thinking video game and just pixels on the screen. They were actually starting to think they were bought into the characters, which is something I wanted to achieve. But obviously, in only 5 weeks, I did not think through the full implications of if we actually deliver that, we got to deal with the challenges of that too. That was a very interesting moment.
But it also does something with that. I forget what the terminology is. It's a psychological term. Like when you see a face in a light socket, or it can be one way or another. It's like a visual ambiguity. That visual ambiguity does give it a 3D effect, though. Like your torso is floating halfway over the hole, so it looks like he's actually floating out of the hole. But now you have to remember get his body not touching anything else to land him. That always played for me and my brother. We're like, this is amazing. How are they doing this on the Atari? And like I said, context is key. Because the other games that week
that's true.
were
one
probably
thing you really have to remember, one of my basic design principles is that a video game does not happen on the screen. Okay? A video game happens in the player's mind. And so when I'm programming, I'm not trying to create an image on a screen. I'm trying to create an experience in the player's mind. And there are things I can do on the screen that are going to impact the player's impression to give them a different sense of what's happening on the screen. And what you're describing is exactly that. So I could actually say I was kind of going for that, right? Because the player's mind is a much bigger place to play in than a screen, especially on the 2600. So you've got to use everything you can to expand and increase that impression. So that was always something I was trying to do. I really feel fortunate that sometimes I succeeded.
I guess I've taken up about 15 minutes of your time. That's all I really wanted to take. One last thing. In your opinion, manuals, a lost art, were they required now? Do you think that we are losing something by losing manuals, physical manuals for games? Or do you think it matters?
What you're touching on there is really a big point. It's a big thing. So here's the thing. The Nolan Bushnell's law for video games, which is easy to learn, tough to master.
Another great documentary.
And there it is, and Nolan used to say, a game has to be easy to learn so people can approach it and engage it, but it has to be tough to master to keep them engaged. I always violated that law. What I used to say is make it tough to learn, because these were home games. These weren't coin ops. Okay, a coin op has to be easy to engage right away. It has to reveal itself to you right away. That's a big limitation in game design. My feeling was, if you can expect a little bit more out of a player to learn the game, you can deliver a much deeper, richer game experience. But it's asking a lot. But the thing about home games is you don't invest a quarter at a time. You put all your quarters down once and you got the game. If you've already invested in the game, I always felt you're motivated to try and learn. So my games depended on manuals a little more, because you had to learn some things about the game to be able to play them. But once you did, I think the games offered a richer experience. So the idea of manuals, for me, I think they're essential, and I think losing manuals is a real problem. On the other hand, though, a lot of people do expect to walk up and just engage a video game. And nowadays, video games can literally teach you to play them themselves. So you don't need the manual. The manual is built into the game. That's a great way to go. That's the best of both worlds. In old school stuff, I think the manuals were something I really relied on, and to see them disappear, like you were saying before. I mean, the whole idea, the game is the whole package. It's the manual, it's the box art, it's not just the cartridge. And, when we lose the manuals, we're losing a piece of the experience. And that's kind of a shame.
Well, thanks, Howard. I really appreciate your time. I know you've got a thriving practice doing therapy for folks, and that's amazing. In this day and age, it's really required,
I do. Well, in some ways, what I like to say is that I've come full circle in my life, because I'm the Silicon Valley therapist, right? I'm a psychotherapist who specializes in high-tech people and gamers. And so I come full circle, because in the old days, I used to make video games to entertain nerds, but now I literally make their lives better.
That's amazing.
But if you want to enjoy yourself, check out Once Upon Atari. It is all about everything that went on. It's got the salacious stories.
Oh.
It also explains the nerd world country, right? There's a whole explanation, because it's not just for nerds. If you're a nerd, you will really dig it, and you'll see the inside story. If you're a non-nerd, I will explain nerds and nerd culture to you, so it won't be as elusive as it seems right now.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to give one last shout out to Carla Malinsky. She designed one of my favorite games, Star Raiders, because that game is so difficult to get unless you have the manual and the controller and understand what she was doing. It's like, if you love Exile, or if you love like the new 4X games that are like, Sins of a Dying Planet, that's the first one, and it was on Atari.
She also did Warlords and Dodge 'em. She did some great games. And the sad thing about Carla Malinsky is that she's always known as, one of the first women programmers, because she was a woman who was programming. But the truth is, she was one of the best programmers on the VCS period. Oh, and she was a great game designer.
She
really
key.
Knew what she did.
That Warlords, it's like, as a coin op and as a home game, fantastic. And the options you get when you play it at home to make it different and better. I think that what really you did, Howard, and this is my last little opinion thing, is that you bridged the gap between the NES era and the Atari era. Your design sense had more to do with how the Nintendo saw their entertainment system as an entertainment system rather than just a video game system. And so their things could be more complex. And you were doing it on literally hardware from the era of disco. Like the RCA Select
I really
division.
Appreciate that.
But it's like, and that's the point of this review that I'm doing right now, the evaluation I'm doing of E.T. for the Atari. I've played bad games. I've played games that are terrible. I've played games that are primitive. But I never saw E.T. as either of those things because I lived through it. Now, I've met a few of the folks who make videos. I have yet to meet James Rolfe, but I find his videos hilarious. And your part in his movie was absolutely wonderful. The only touch of sadness I felt was that it felt like they blamed you for something that you didn't do anything bad in that situation. Even Pac-Man wasn't bad for what it had to be, which was 24K, and that's all you really need to say. The truth is, I don't believe E.T. is the worst game of all time either. But I do prefer when people identify it that way. I like the idea that I did the worst game of all time because Yar's Revenge is frequently cited as the best game of all time.
So as long as I have both, I
I
have
know.
the greatest range of any designer in history.
You're the Kobe
and I'm
Bryant
very
of video
proud
games at that
distinction.
point. Well, thank you, Howard, very much for your time. I do appreciate it. And what
You're welcome.
you have?
Let me
I
just
heard you had
say
a
that,
book out.
with Once
Yeah.
Upon a Atari, you will laugh, you will cry, you will kiss less than $20 goodbye. I promise you.
All right, and that's at onceuponatari.com. Get it. There's an order from Commander Dan. And thank you so much, Howard. This has been a blast and a huge honor for me from one of your major fans. Thanks so much.
Dan, I really appreciate it. I
No
really
problem.
appreciate talking with you. Very cool.
All
Thank
right.
you so much for having me.
Great. Well, thanks for coming aboard the Retro Station 1989. And everyone remember to always, always stay retro. I just want to preface this next section with a big-ass rumor balloon pop, okay? There's a story told about this game, E.T. It often said that it was experimental and out on a limb, and Atari had never traversed before this idea of making a movie into an action game. That's a narrative that is not only wrong, but also part of a narrative that was disparaging to a hero of mine, Howard Scott Warshaw. Ray Kassar is noted to have said, "We'd never done a video game based on a movie." Horse shit. I mean, it's arguable that Superman for the Atari 2600 is not based on the Superman movie, but it did capitalize on the Superman movie's dominance in the theaters when Warner Brothers picked them up. Raiders of the Lost Ark, however, which came out before E.T., was an action game based on a movie created by Howard Scott Warshaw. So, Ray Kassar, jam it up your ass. It was horse shit. Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in the same year and was by the same goddamn director. You'd think Ray Kassar would know this, but he didn't. You ever see an interview with this guy, you'll see the fact that he treats everything like it's the wrong business from the beginning. It's great. Check it out. There's Easy to Learn, Hard to Master. It's a documentary. Check it out. The guy's a real piece of work in that one. Anyway, Ray, at the time that Yar's Revenge came out, told Howard, "Keep making games, Howard," after the masterpiece Yar's Revenge was released to critical and commercial success. And we already got the scoop on the interesting bits. You know, we got it directly from Howard himself. Stuff you can't get everywhere else. So let's talk about the game. The so-called worst game ever made. According to the internet at large, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial on the Atari 2600 is worse than every bad thing that ever happened. And I'm not making an analogy for it because it's wrong. The game is broken up into 6 environments. 2 pit screens, 3 forest screens, and 1 town screen that consists of the FBI building, Elliot's house, and the Science Institute. The FBI and Science Headquarters are where the bad guys take E.T. to slow him down. And if the FBI agent gets E.T., they take all of his communicator pieces. Like, they think he's building a bomb or something, I guess. And the wells and pits and the FBI agent are probably the greatest elements of frustration in the game. But is E.T. defenseless? Nah. He has a series of mysterious alien abilities, fueled by Reese's Pieces. TM. Copyright. Not an ad. Anyway. E.T. has mind control. They can send the baddies back to Washington, D.C., which isn't just sending them to the other screen, which is the buildings in the town area. It sends them off the screen back to D.C. to come back at a later time. E.T. can also use his ESP to find parts of his phone. He can use his mental connection with Elliot to call Elliot to rescue him from the bad guys, find missing phone pieces, and take Reese's Pieces to his home for bonus points. And you'll want to do this occasionally, because if you have too many Reese's Pieces, it starts hurting you. E.T. can also teleport to a screen in the direction of the symbol showing on the power zone indicator at the top. The last powers are to use the phone to signal the light ship to come back to pick him up, and to use the landing zone itself. The game is a balance between finding phone pieces, eating candy for energy to power your alien levitation ability, and you're avoiding the human agencies with huge boners for slowing your progress for some reason. Like I said, if you get too much candy, you lose points after the 31st piece you collect. And if you have 9 pieces of candy, you can hand it off to Elliot, and he'll find you a piece of your phone. And the game is beatable in a minute. Seriously, look at this insanity. I'm going to talk over while this kid does this, but look at this. As a kid, I just had fun figuring out all the different things E.T. can do. How to save up candy to get Elliot to go after any piece in the big pits, which suck farts from a 70s Coke bottle, by the way, to get out of. Anyway, it's one of those things that you have to learn. It's a complex puzzle of an adventure game. What it is not is an action game. What it is a misunderstood classic. A game that presents itself as a simple multi-screen action game, but it's actually a game of logic, balance, and for the amount of time Howard had to create this thing, A goddamn miracle of the tech used to create it. Howard Scott Warshaw is literally one of my heroes. The way Peter Parker looks up to Iron Man, or the way we all can appreciate the pillars of our respective fandoms. George Lucas, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Miyamoto-san. This guy stands in my Mount Rushmore of artist inspirations. And from this little guy to me today, the people who were doing the creative, out-of-the-box thinking and hard work, they're the ones who inspired me to keep trying. Now, I'm a published author and illustrator in the tabletop industry, and I've created products with the same spirit Howard Scott Warshaw had in mind when creating the misunderstood piece of art known as E.T. Make it fun, make it interesting, make it your own. Make it unforgettable. But there's a question, not a philosophical one, but a practical question. So, does E.T. for the Atari 2600 have a license to play?
Affirmative. The game is not at all as critics have presented it. With graphics at the advanced end of the Atari's capabilities and gameplay that requires brain power as well as reflexes, I would say that yes, E.T. for the Atari 2600 has a license to play.
Well said, Margot. And that's going to wrap up Sci-Fi Month.
Oh my god! That's a speed laser, Gatling laser.
Thought I forgot, didn't you? And this week, we barreled through a lot of danger and a lot of hardship. So next week, I got something a little softer for everybody. Fluffier, kinder, a little scarier, but not to worry. It's a little known gem out there for the Super Nintendo. If you can guess what it is down below, you get a no prize. I'll give you a hint. Shark Dog. If you can get it on that, the no prize is yours. So until next week, remember to always, always stay retro. Peace.
Get upset on the internet.